as we swept on to the lake's surface, and the glance of light coming over a dip in the ice walls to the left lit up the dead faces and half-withered flowers of my fellow travellers with startling distinctness. I noticed with a new terror, at the lower end of the lake towards which we were hurrying, the water suddenly disappeared in a cloud of frosty spray, and it was from thence came the low, ominous rumble which had sounded up the ravine as we approached. It was the fall, and beyond, the stream dropped down glassy step after step, in wild pools and rapids, through which no boat could live for a moment, to a black cavern entrance, where it was swallowed up in eternal night. I would not go that way. With a yell such as those solitudes had probably never heard since the planet was fashioned out of the void, I seized the paddle again and struck out furiously from the main current, with the result of postponing the crisis for a time, and finding myself bobbing round towards the northern amphitheatre, where the light fell clearest from the planet overhead. It was like a great ballroom with those constellations for tapers, and a ghastly crowd of Martians were doing cotillions and waltzes all about me on their rafts as the troubled water, icy cold and clear as glass, eddied us here and there in solemn confusion. On the narrow beaches at the cliff foot were hundreds of wrecked voyagers, the wallflowers of that ghostly assembly room, and I went jostling and twirling round the circle as though looking for a likely partner, until my brain spun and my heart was sick. For 20 minutes fate played with me, and then the deadly suck of the stream got me down again close to where the water began to race for the falls. I vowed savagely I would not go over them if it could be helped, and struggled furiously. On the left, in shadow, a narrow beach seemed to lie between the water and the cliff foot. Towards it I fought. At the very first stroke I fouled a raft. The occupant thereof came tumbling aboard and nearly swamped me. But now it was a fight for life, so him I seized without ceremony by the clammy neck and leg and threw back into the water. Then another playful Martian butted the behind part of my canoe and set it spinning so that all the stars seemed to be dancing giddily in the sky. With a yell I shoved him off, but only to find his comrades were closing round me in a solid ring as we sucked down to the abyss at ever increasing speed. Then I fought like a fury, hacking, pushing and paddling shorewards, crying out in my excitement, and spinning and bumping and twisting ever downwards. For every foot I gained they pushed me on a yard, as though determined their fate should be mine also. They crowded round me in a compact circle, their poor flower-girt heads nodding as the swift current curtsied their crafts. They hemmed me in with desperate persistency as we spun through the ghostly starlight in a swirling mass down to destruction. And in a minute we were so close to the edge of the fall I could see the water break into ridges as it felt the solid bottom give way under it. We were so close that already the foremost rafts, 10 yards ahead, were tipping, and their occupants one by one waving their arms about and tumbling from their funeral chairs as they shot into the spray veil and went out of sight under the faint rainbow that was arched over there, the symbol of peace and the only lovely thing in that gruesome region. Another minute, and I must have gone with them. It was too late to think of getting out of the tangle then. The water behind was heavy with trailing silks and flowers. We were jammed together almost like one huge float, and in that latter fact lay my one chance. On the left was a low ledge of rocks leading back to the narrow beach already mentioned, and the ledge came out to within a few feet of where the outermost boat on that side would pass it. It was the only chance and a poor one, but already the first rank of my fleet was trembling on the brink, and without stopping to weigh matters, I bounded off my own canoe and on to the raft alongside, which rocked with my weight like a tea-tray. From that I leapt, with such hearty goodwill as I had never had before, on to the second and third. I jumped from the footstool of one Martian to the knee of another, steadying myself by a free use of their nodding heads as I passed, and every time I jumped a ship collapsed behind me. As I staggered with my spring into that last and outermost boat, the ledge was still 6 feet away, half hidden in a smother of foam, and the rim of the great fall just under it. Then I drew all my sailor agility together, and just as the little vessel was going bow up over the edge, I leapt from her, came down blinded with spray on the ledge, rolled over and over, clutched frantically at the frozen soil, and was safe for the moment, but only a few inches from the vortex below. As soon as I picked myself up and got breath, I walked shorewards and found, with great satisfaction, that the ledge joined the shelving beach, and so walked on in the blue obscurity of the cliff shadow back from the falls, in the bare hope that the beach might lead some way into the gully through which we had come and into open country beyond. But after a couple of 100 yards this hope ended as abruptly as the spit itself in deep water, and there I was, as far as the darkness would allow me to ascertain, as utterly trapped as any mortal could be. I will not dwell on the next few minutes, for no one likes to acknowledge he has been unmanned even for a space. When those minutes were over, calmness and consideration returned, and I was able to look about. All the opposite cliffs, rising sheer from the water, were in light, their coal blue and white surfaces rising far into the black star fields overhead. Looking at them intently from this vantage point, I saw at first without understanding that along them horizontally, tier above tiers, were rows of objects, well, good heavens! They were like men and women in all sorts of strange postures and positions. Rubbing my eyes and looking again, I perceived with a start and a strange creepy feeling down my back that they were men and women. Hundreds of them, thousands, all in rows as cormorants stand upon the seaside cliffs. Myriads and myriads now I looked about, in every conceivable pose and attitude, but never a sound, never a movement amongst the vast concourse. Then I turned back to the cliffs behind me. Yes, they were there too, dimmer by reason of the shadows, but there for certain. From the snowfields far above, down, good heavens, to the very level where I stood. There was one of them not 10 yards away, half in and half out of the ice wall, and setting my teeth, I walked over and examined him. There was another further in behind as I peered into the clear blue depth, and another behind that one, and another behind him, just like cherries in a jelly. It was startling and almost incredible, yet so many wonderful things had happened of late that wonders were losing their sharpness, and I was soon examining the cliff almost as coolly as though it were some trivial geological section, some new kind of petrified sea urchin which had caught my attention, and not a whole nation in ice, a huge amphitheatre of fossilized humanity which stared down on me. The matter was simple enough when you came to look at it with philosophy. The Martians had sent their dead down here for many thousand years, and as they came they were frozen in, the bands and zones in which they sat indicating perhaps alternating seasons. Then, after nature had been storing them like that for long ages, some upheaval happened, and this cleft and lake opened through the heart of the preserve. Probably the river once ran far up there where the starlight was crowning the blue cliffs with a silver diadem of light. Only when this hollow opened did it slowly deepen in lower courses, spreading out in a lake, and eventually tumbling down those icy steps lose itself in the dark roots of the hills. It was very simple, no doubt, but incredibly weird and wonderful to me, who stood there, the sole living thing in that immense concourse of dead humanity. Look where I would it was the same everywhere. Those endless rows of frozen bodies lying, sitting, or standing, stared at me from every niche and cornice. It almost seemed, as the light veered slowly round, as though they smiled and frowned at times, but never a word was there amongst those millions. The silence itself was audible, and save the dull low thunder of the fall, so monotonous the ear became accustomed to and soon disregarded it, there was not a sound anywhere, not a rustle, not a whisper broke the eternal calm of that great caravansary of the dead. The very rattle of the shingle under my feet, and the jingle of my navy scabbard seemed offensive to the perfect hush, and, too awed to be frightened, I presently turned away from the dreadful shine of those cliffs, and felt my way along the base of the wall to my own side. There was no means of escape that way, and presently the shingle beach itself gave out as started, where the cliff wall rose straight from the surface of the lake. So I turned back, and finding a grotto in the ice, determined to make myself as comfortable as might be until daylight came. End of Chapter 11. Recording by James Christopher, jxchristopher@yahoo.com.